I think this is a fantastic conference because this is the one where, without waiting for a mandate from on high, the industry just gets together to resolve its own issues, to find a way forward, just grasp the nettle and actually introduce BIM. And I think it's great that all you people are here. It's a pity that some of the other people who are involved in the industry aren't at this conference at the moment to hear the message that's coming so strongly from everybody. So I'd just like to first introduce Architectus. We have 4 design studios in Australia and New Zealand and a representative office in Shanghai. We represent about 200 plus design professionals across those offices. And we've been using BIM for 10 years. I might say that, thanks for the insight, Andrew, but I think that if I had lost $200,000 on our implementation project in BIM, I wouldn't be here speaking to you today. Anyway, we've had considerable success with BIM, and that's been in an environment where, as time has gone by, we've been more and more able to work with other people and really develop a collaborative environment for BIM. Recently, we were very pleased to receive the American Institute of Architects Technology and Architectural Practice Award in the Owner's Choice BIM Award category for #1 BLI. So I think the Opera House has previously won an American Institute of Architects TAP Award from Australia, so it's great for BIM in this country to get that kind of a profile. And the building itself has been awarded in many international forums and in Australia. And I think that a lot of that is to do with some of the design quality that was able to be built into that design through very active engagement with our models and a lot of analysis and simulation. Now, for a large part of our BIM, we have actually been practicing lonely BIM, and I've commented before, its only virtue really is that it allows you to practice and get your own house in order and know really all of the detailed aspects of what you need to be doing to work with BIM. What we really want to do is be working in the collaborative BIM environment. And this is an example. I'm working on this as an architect. It's my own project, 750 student beds with a major engineering company that has its own reputation for BIM, as do a lot of the individuals that work for that company. It's no one that's here today, but in fact, even though we're all working in BIM, we're working in the same Revit platform, we have not actually seen their model for more than a year. And to me, it's a great shame, it's a great lost opportunity, but there is no BIM environment created around this practice. It's maybe an earlier stage even to the ones talked about yesterday, BIM enabled, is it a BIM potential, but not taken up at all. So I'll just take a step back and think, well, why are we collaborating? What is it that owners really want from BIM? And clearly time and cost savings. And I think, as Andrew alluded to, as BIM becomes more mainstream, as it extends further and further into construction, as it starts to optimise designs, and as people start to have confidence in that, then that will also start to bring about a reduction in subcontractor pricing, which will flow into head contractor prices, which will position certain parties at a competitive advantage, and that will mean that will be the tipping point where BIM becomes mainstream. There's a lot of hard heads in the world, and this money angle, especially if it's US dollars like that, that's what really persuades them. But also better design, yeah, sorry, Chris, for the one bly, but this design was very much proved and tested using BIM processes, collaborative BIM processes. We had Kundal doing glare analysis and heat loads. We have a lot of computational fluid dynamics. We have a detailed examination of the multi-skin facade. We did view occlusion studies. We did lift studies. We did all sorts of things. Instruct did finite element and slab deflection studies. Arup did very detailed consideration of the models at a slightly later stage, but that is your construction stage model. All of these things are unavailable for analysis and simulation in the 2D non-BIM world. The other thing owners want is lower risks. They want to not discover that the project is way over budget, too late to change it. They want to know that the design can actually be built. And finally, I think FM models and the BIM MEPOS initiative is very much based around the idea of transporting data from the early design stage of the project through so it's still there in the facilities model. We've been able to take the one-bly handover model and prepare that as a platform for a facilities model for Dexus. And I think in terms of persuading an owner client like Dexus to mandate BIM on a project, it's essential that they think they're getting something for this, and at this stage they're not actually getting cost reductions. So for them to have a facilities model that they may at any time in the future, when that becomes more mainstream, be able to take up and use, is a very important selling point for the entire concept of BIM. So BIM is really an enabler. In the 2D world, we don't have the quality of data and the timeliness of data to enable us to collaborate in any meaningful kind of a way. So BIM becomes a single point of truth. If we have proper model progression and we understand where the model is meant to be at any particular time, and we have a proper definition of level of development so that we know whether objects are specified or at that stage unspecified but really just placeholders, then we can interrogate other people's models to find out where their design is up to at any given stage. Now that's a level of data mining that's not possible at all in the 2D world. All we do is get finalised 2D documentation that we don't really understand, isn't necessarily coordinated, and doesn't have any data or intelligence attached to the elements displayed, so we can't really find out what they are except by asking, and that as a object-by-object activity is far too onerous a task for anybody to do. So the problems with 2D were illustrated by this. We modelled the reference design for Town Hall Station in the canned Sydney Metro on behalf of Lang O'Rourke so that they could use that as a basis to estimate the quantities. And some things we found in that reference design was that, first of all, it wasn't resolved. Most of the fire stairs just never hit the ground, so too bad if there was a fire in there. And also that the 2D plans and sections didn't represent the geometry. There was no way of actually understanding the material quantities inside this with its complex forms without having modelled it. So it was a very informative exercise to have done that. So I propose that BIM really needs to be put at the centre of what we're doing as the main channel for communication between the parties, and by all means have a face-to-face meeting around that, but forget about 2D document issues and waiting for another batch of drawings that'll take you a week to flip through even before you even really understand them. Make this the centre. So at One Bly, it was a very simple topology to the way that was put together. We basically had 3 models coming together, and when they all link together, you can just think of that as the BIM. And from that, that data gets exported, sometimes one way, sometimes two way, to various other kinds of analysis packages, various things like Ecotect or Strand 7 or whatever for particular analysis and simulation functionalities. So this gives us a real project understanding. We kind of understand where the other consultants are up to with their thinking. And it allows innovation because, you know, I think often innovation is actually driven by having another person around the table to the usual bunch of people who are around the table, someone who can just throw in that off-the-wall idea that actually is quite a good idea. And I think this is one of the key advantages if we can start to move to a situation where we have early subcontractor involvement in our projects, early contractor involvement. If we can get those ideas in early, that is going to change the way that we actually design things. And, you know, making BIM the centre, getting everybody together, just spinning the model and having a look and seeing where it's developed to at a certain time. But, okay, collaboration just does not come naturally to project teams. You know, we're used to working inside our own organisations. We know our reporting lines. We know what we're expected to do. One of the things we're expected to do is not waste a lot of time talking to other people. We expected to make money for the project. I think that this quote illustrates something. If I asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Now, Henry Ford, who is a great innovator, said that. And it's very true. I think a lot of what we've been doing with BIM, certainly inside consultancies, is actually producing the same documentation requirements that we had in the past, but using 3D modelling to do it. Now, that does actually have efficiencies. It could be worth doing, and it's a kind of a less risky process, so it's got some advantages pulling in that direction. But it's not BIM, it's not enabling collaboration. We really need to be breaking down these silos and find a way whereby a project team that has members from across a number of different organisations can actually get together in a truly collaborative way. And I believe that that needs a framework. I don't think that just by the client saying, we'd like you guys to all use BIM, and to me that implies you're all going to collaborate, I don't think that that does anything much at all. I think what we really need to is have a very detailed, in fact, strategy around how we're going to collaborate on the project. And a few people have made the point. This isn't about technology so much. The technology is complex, there's no doubt about it. And, you know, if somebody ever comes, I am very hands-on, Andrew, and if somebody comes to me with a Revit problem, you know, sometimes the answer is not at all apparent. It can be very, very, if you're hands-on with Revit, you'll know what I'm talking about. There need to be those technology guys that have the answers, but only part of the picture. We really need to be very inclusive in the way that we involve all of the designers, all of the parts of a project team in using the BIM at the centre in order to collaborate, and that requires strategy. Requires cooperation and it requires trust, and I'll mention a bit later, but you know, we don't actually have a hard contractual framework in which this is happening at the moment. What we have at the moment is people going ahead and saying, this BIM, it's a great idea and we're going to do it because we're enthusiastic about doing it. We're going to throw a little bit more in, a bit more effort into our projects because we think that's very beneficial to the project. We're going to find people that we like working with and we're going to try and work with them again and again on different projects. And that's what's happening at the moment. It's based on building trust and building cooperation. And that trust thing, I think, you know, as we want to move into lower prices to benefit ourselves, well, better margins, I maybe could put that. There's no way that anybody pricing a job is going to start to reduce their price for best practice BIM if they don't believe that best practice is going to be delivered on the project. And how can they know it until there's a trust environment that's been created on that project, maybe by prior experience or whatever. But if you price for perfection and then all of a sudden it's not perfect, well, then you've lost money, and subcontractors don't like to do that. So we need to find a way to work as a team without compromising our organisational interests. Take your kids to see Despicable Me too. So look, there are some industry initiatives around there. BIM App, as I mentioned, I think it's great. NatSpec, The BIM guidelines that NatSpec have been producing, I think, have a fantastic educative value for our clients. They need to know that there is something out there that is understood on a common basis by the whole industry. Building Smart and its work within interoperability and its work in bringing the government into the discussion. Also very important work. And Collaborate Australia, this group has got together from a group of leading BIM proponents inside Australia off their own bat to start to look at what level of development means in the Australian context, for instance. Just a comment on some things that are touted as reasons why we're not collaborating and not moving towards BIM. Interoperability. Well, it might be difficult, but it's certainly possible. We are currently interoperating perfectly well on Sunshine Coast Hospital with Lend-Lease and Rice Staubney and with Mitchell Brantman. The models are produced in Revit and in ArchiCAD. The cost models in Costex. We're using various means of transporting information. It is a fully interoperated project. It doesn't have issues that cause us to question in any way that project should be a BIM project. File formats, the same. There are file formats for whatever purpose you need. There's quite good interchange between them. I don't see it as an issue. IP. Look, IP has its value when it's transferred, not when it's kept inside your silo. So its value comes from the exchange. Personally, anybody can have my IP. By the time they're using it, I've invented some better IP, I hope. And any consultants should probably be aware that, if they think that their library is absolutely something fantastic, every time somebody leaves, they're walking out with the entire thing on a USB stick anyway. So really, was it that great to get to go in to the trenches to defend your IP? I think really, to be very frank, IP is an excuse to not show your dirty laundry in a model. The reason people don't want to exchange a model is because they know that they did a lot of cheating inside there and that somebody else is going to know all about that. Not because somebody's going to be just wowed with how clever they were in the way that they put it together. And I guess there is another reason in that there's no trust between the parties. Maybe you think you're going to be sacked off the job. You don't want to give away your model then. And content then. Look, some of us have been doing this for 10 years. We're not waiting for content. When content comes in national common basis or whatever other, I think that it will start to represent as much of a management issue as creating content is at the present. And I know that there's a ton of content for four steel decking manufacturers in Australia. A lot of families, took me ages to download. It's all sitting there. I don't want all the staff members doing it individually, but it's still got to be managed whether we create it or not. So the 2D world had some very established methodologies, and we have a fair idea of where we are when we're kind of at the end of schematic design phase or something along those lines. And it's actually described in architectural context in pretty loose terms. It doesn't need to, it is maybe a list of drawings. It doesn't actually tell you what information's on those drawings necessarily. It's not really telling you how well the walls might be selected or whatever. Just basically that they're there. We were comfortable in that 2D world. As we move into what Homer Simpson called the imaginary third dimension, it's a whole new rule set. We need now to start thinking about enabling this kind of, doesn't want to really show, but enabling this kind of process where instead of stepping through the phases one by one and never looking back and never looking forward, we're actually going through an iterative process of developing the design in a collaborative, multidisciplinary kind of a way before, in the end, that comes off and becomes the building design. We need to answer some fundamental questions, the who, what, when, if, well, not if, where and how questions. Level of development and information exchange. Now, this diagram here, which Andrew showed, this was developed from a workshop process that we had on 100 Mount Street that was addressing the problem of the mechanical consultant not needing to go too far forward with their work inappropriately to the design stage that the architect was at. We still had a lot of structural changes coming through. We were still making a lot of changes to cores and things in the building. And for Arup to have gone forward and just started using actual model objects in their BIM would have meant a lot of connections and things were being positioned and they would all come straight back out again. What actually was needed was just a zonal way of looking at it. It just needed a space allocation, essentially. So that was determined to minimise redundant workflow and make the process more fluid. Level of development represents classes of objects and not the model of the whole. And I think it's an alien field in most disciplines and especially in architecture. I was commenting the other day, I think that architects really only have 2 or 3 points of level of development in the way that they think. Sort of, we know we need a wall, and then next step, we've got a fully selected wall with a fire rating and a construction method and something, and there are no steps in between. And we certainly don't take Revit models and upgrade our families throughout in 5 distinct steps to represent 5 distinct stages of level of development, like it might be assumed you do from looking at a BIM execution plan in isolation. So that is something that needs to work through in the way that you would develop a framework. I mean, perhaps it's a case that objects in models need to be tagged with some basics as to whether they are still generic or whether they've been selected or not. Maybe that's just a switch on the object rather than anything else, and we use the same family all the way through, or whatever it might be. Because if some of the information in the model is unreliable, then it all is. Like, you know, if somebody else is looking at your model, and they're trying to speed up the workflow, then if they can rely on this bit, or if they can't rely on this bit, they're not going to rely on this bit over here. One of them might in fact be reliable, right? So we need to actually have a defined concept of how that's going to work. There's also issues of asymmetry of information. I won't go through the whole thing, but you know, sometimes I need a bit of information that somebody else wasn't thinking of providing till well further down the track, right? So we need to actually flag those issues and find a resolution for it. I saw a presentation from someone from HOK, whose name escapes me, but they were saying they had a project office. They were all co-located and they were working on a project together. It was an extremely collaborative environment, except that the HOK guys found that they were spending all their time answering questions about their own design and their own model coming from all the other parties rather than the other parties looking at the models themselves. And in the end, they said, you're only allowed to service other people's information requirements for a 1-hour period every morning and then get back to work, basically. So we need to make sure that actually everybody has the skills to go and interrogate, and that we have the integrity in the models so that we have reliable data that can be used. So model progression, we need to know where we are with the design of our models, and that what is selected, what isn't selected. I think part of that is having a publication cycle, we called it. Alex had a similar idea yesterday, so good to see people are generating the same kinds of ideas. But you can't have continuously changing models. Nobody can get a grip on that. we're always in a state of transforming our models and it's half done. We need to have some hold points where we just freeze that model and get out, and that's what people look at. And that can go with clash reports or revisions clouds or whatever it's necessary to tell people which bits you can look at and rely on and which bits to ignore for now because they're still halfway through a change. But the idea of a model server with everybody checking stuff in and out and making changes all the time, I think is really like wrestling jelly in the current environment. It just takes time to get any change done to a model. So we need to understand other parties' project workflows. That's what that LOD example with Arab was. We need to understand that at schematic design, or when we're ready to go into a development application, the architect is going to have columns in his drawing set that goes to council. But at that stage, the structural engineer could perfectly well just be working with the sketches and calculations and a fairly conceptual design of what they're doing. They may not have gone into hardline at that point. In fact, I think it's somewhat unlikely that they have. So we need to understand that that's the way the workflow works. If it doesn't suit the architect for it to happen that way, well, that needs to be workshopped and a solution found to it. If we're going to rely on their objects in our models to complete the picture of any 2D output, well then we are then letting somebody else have authority and responsibility over something that's absolutely essential for us. So perhaps a better way to approach that is to say we're going to do a handover at a certain stage, or we're going to have managed but parallel objects, and we're going to have a system in place where we don't double count those objects. But there are a lot of those kind of issues in bringing multiple models together. Everybody's work, I mean, this is a collaborative environment. Everybody's work is so dependent on everybody else's, and the basins, are they architectural or are they plumbing? The wall lights. Are they electrical and lighting, or are they just architectural features? So it really should be discussed and mapped out. We don't really want to tussle about who's owning what. It's probably more of a tussle about who doesn't get the stick in the case of design collaboration. But it needs to be worked out before we get too far down the track of the project. Skill sets. It's very rare to get the wise head with all the construction experience and understanding into the same person who's the gun modeller. It just doesn't happen very, very often. There's Duncan Sharp, but there's not too many others, and that's an issue for just even internal collaboration. But it's also an issue for collaboration about the meeting table, and I was pleased to see some examples of people sitting around table directly poking and prodding a model and then marking up some changes and then going back and briefing their modelling staff on what those changes needed to be made, because that's the people with the authority to make a decision, making the decision and not leaving it up to staff who may not have the experience. And I'm thinking in our own example, these are some precast planks. We've modelled them, we're laying them out. We want to know where our floor wastes are so that we can have our tile set out. It's very neat and architectural. So we want to know where these hollow core voids are. But do our staff understand building tolerance? Do they know how far off that might be, or how close these planks can be to each other? This whole world is bringing up issues that were never really issues before, because we never had these capabilities before. And, you could get away with a lot in the past. Much more is concealed by 2D documentation than is revealed. Why? I think when we do some BIM processes, we really need to be thinking about, is this servicing the ultimate objectives that we introduce BIM on this project for? If this is never going to be a facilities model, well, you wouldn't need to put in that kind of data. I've seen BIM execution plans that seem to have been produced as a purely intellectual exercise, bringing in lots of cool ideas from all over the world that ramble on about 7D and 8D and 9D, and I'm thinking, well, what about the 4 contractor who sees this and got no idea what it is that they would be doing, what they'd be signing up for, or how to do it, or what it's for. And I think that's the case. I mean, I think you've got to sit down and figure out what you want before you start specifying all the individual tasks that you're going to do. Model issue formats, review formats, dealing with non-BIM players, all things that I think need to be addressed, worked through. I won't labour them too much. And a BIM flow diagram. I just pinched this one off the internet. It doesn't represent any real project to me, but you can see there's a lot of complicated interactions, and all these lines represent different things happening at different times. Do the project leaders in the various offices, do they actually understand this diagram, or anyone like it? Do they know what this is signing them up for, these links, and this is just representing a one-off thing or something, or how often is it, and who's doing it, and all of those kind of things. I mean, there's a whole aspect to BIM that is very technical and should be maybe left to some technicians who know the answer to this kind of stuff and can just report to the project leader and say, look, it's not a problem, you can do it, you just do it this way. File transfer mechanisms, we've seen it from Aconex today, we've seen Cloud 360, there's lots of ways of doing this at the moment. I don't think there's much point to it unless you have that publication cycle in place so that you know really rigorously when you're going to be delivering information, and also importantly who might be falling behind in their production of design information, because if they're falling behind in getting their stuff out, well, you're basically not collaborating with them. They haven't thought out their design sufficiently for you to make any intelligent kind of comments on it. And co-location represents a great opportunity on the project sizes that warrant it, but impossible to do on anything small. Our organisation silo will override any benefit from co-location. Project scope, setting fees and expectations. We used to do a certain amount of work, then we could do it with BIM authoring, and that was actually less work once you're good at it. And then we start to do all of these extra things because we can, and we're providing a lot better value, but if those are add-on services, we've got to find a way of capturing that and getting paid for doing that, at least getting credit for it, at least getting the same team back together, the same successful team. And someone else said it here, the quality of the project's probably the quality of the team. Get that same successful team together to produce another successful project. They've got the trust and cooperation issues already sorted between themselves. Our scopes are so often still defined just in terms of drawing outputs. It's crazy, but the industry itself, outside of this room, just hasn't moved on. Now, the Americans have some IPD contracts, and they've got things in place like incentives, and there's a pot of money at the end, and that is sharing the benefits of this additional analysis and cost-saving measures, ultimately, but effort up front across the entire team. A fantastic way to go, except we don't have a structure for that in Australia. And it might be a long way away, but I think it's a case that we really can't wait for that contract to be put in place. We've got to find a way to start reaping some of these benefits now without the IPD contract. So I think that's challenging, but I think it's not impossible to do that. To me, if there are a lot of technical issues, if there's a lot of people issues, and it's very much across organisations, then you need a specialist who's dealt with these things, understands how that all works, and can put it together. And the earlier you could get that kind of person on board on a project, the more you'll reap your benefits. And my focus here has been on design consultants, and we're starting to see this is going into position in the construction stage of projects. But a lot of the opportunity has already passed by the time that we reach the construction stage of a project. So if you can get just even the basic elements about how people are going to collaborate, that framework, who's doing what, answering all of those W questions from the beginning of a project, then you can enable, or you can assist in enabling of collaboration that BIM allows. So on 100 Mount Street, we did perform this task on behalf of Laing O'Rourke, and it was an approach where first we set the project goals and objectives, and then we determined which tasks were going to meet those goals. And we could do that in quite a lot of detail. And if a task wasn't required by a goal, well, that task wasn't in there. And we could do things like a staged handover between the consultant information and the subcontractor information. Actually, Laing O'Rourke are the developer, so they're the client, and they're also ultimately the contractor here, and they also have relationships with subcontractors. So that means that we could, for instance, look at having mechanical design be taken over by the subcontractor far earlier than it would normally be done. And look, I've been an architect for 25 years or so, and I don't think that I have ever seen the consultant's mechanical design built. I don't think I've seen it happen once. Every time I see the shop drawings come in or whatever, they are all the equipment's been changed, whatever intake was on the left is now on the right, etc. The whole thing is completely modified. So it seems to me it's no point really in taking the consultant's design beyond the point of a tested reference design that works, is workable with performance criteria. The rest is to the subcontractor, who's much, much closer to the market, knows what equipment is available and what price it's coming in at, which is important. So thank you very much. I hope you found that interesting.